Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining. Where are you joining from today?
I am in the Garden State of New Jersey. So I commute into our head office out of New York.
Nice. Well, just for background, I guess, can you just give everyone kind of your background and kind of your role at E&Y and your focus on real estate?
Yeah, EY. First of all, I've been the vast majority of my career with EY. I started the firm in our Southern California office and found my way to setting up various businesses around. One was in Texas. I started our Japanese practice, and then now I'm based and run the entire real estate business out of New York. We have about 17,000 people that support the real estate industry, and we're obviously located in all the major cities. Do consulting, advisory, and obviously our core business is audit, tax, and strategy.
Got it. And I imagine that, from your vantage point, you're having so many conversations with the leaders of real estate companies globally. Just at a macro level, how would you characterize the state of the real estate industry today?
Yeah, look, I think perspective is key. 4 or 5 months ago, I think if you would to, kind of check the pulse of the entire industry around the globe, the market conditions were either good, very good, or outstanding. From that lens, you fast forward, 4 or 5 months, and we're navigating, properties flat on their backs, and obviously an incredibly difficult time. So that that window is it's difficult. It's ironic. This was my second pandemic. I was in Tokyo for the first SARS. And I think, the perspective of we've got to kind of start to look past this, as difficult as it may be. But as I survey kind of our leaders around the business, I talk to our folks in Southeast Asia, in China, you start to see that, there is an end to this. And in China, we're seeing some of the occupancies in the hospitality business, albeit tough, improving. We're seeing activity in Germany that's improving. So it's a difficult time. We are our industry is a series of contracts of businesses that are tenants, that support landlords, that support mortgage loans, that support credit bonds, and that entire chain is obviously severely disrupted as businesses shut down. I think the other kind of key thing to think about is it is tough also on people. There's a lot of young talent in these companies, and many of them haven't been in the industry for more than 10 years. And so this is their real bump in the road that they're experiencing for the first time. So it's difficult as well for people. But a lot of the veterans that run this business have been to this rodeo before. And I think, if you really look at how we're responding as an industry, I think we're doing under the circumstances, an incredible job of responding to, the challenges at hand and making the most of a very difficult situation.
And given what you were saying about the experience of your clients in Asia, that's a really also interesting aperture to have, which is in some ways they were the first impacted. And I'm curious, what are some of the trends that you think that portends for the US, right, with respect to our markets and our recovery here? What do you think we can learn from Asia?
Well, I'll tell you one. This was maybe a month or 6 weeks ago when I called one of my partners in Singapore. And I was speaking to her, and we were talking for a while, and she we're talking about back to the office and, what's the implications and all that. She says, oh my God, I'm 327. What do you mean you're 327? She says, I'm 327. I will be the 327th person that can be allowed to go back to the office, and I can't wait. And I think that's, telling, in the sense that, obviously we're all navigating what remote work is going to mean, and, oh, we'll never go back to the office and all that. I think geographically the answer is going to be different. And I think we've got to be mindful about, I don't think every single region and every single part of the world is going to kind of view this remote work, the same, in the same way. I think maybe one other, story is, I spoke with my colleague in Germany, and he said he was in the office, and our in New York, we're not back yet. We're really being very, thoughtful and on getting back. But he said, I'm back in the office. I said, so how is it? He says, I love it. I said, why? He says, because my day ends when I go home. And, and I think, I think this pandemic has, it has absolutely, cemented some changes in behavior and changed our view of what's possible, from a remote perspective. But, there's also, obviously the other side of the equations of remote fatigue and so on and so forth. So I just think, different perspectives, I think, are a little bit insightful of what is this future going to look like when we're really back to normal.
And it's an interesting point of view, the idea that like a work day and kind of either being at or not being at the office marks this line of demarcation between like, professional life and personal life. And to some extent we've collapsed that, right? Like that has been collapsed by virtue of Zoom, right? We're both
totally
in each other's homes, and it almost feels like work has become ubiquitous. Like I work all the time, and I'm working in very different time zones. And it feels like, a lot of tenants and a lot of big companies are thinking through, what does the future of work look like? Is it virtualized completely? And does it transition to truly a virtual state? But a lot of the feedback I've gotten is that it feels like we're hitting this upper bound of what people can tolerate, what knowledge workers can really tolerate from a work-life balance perspective. And that COVID has really pressurized that test. With all that as a backdrop, what do you think the net of the whole world's going to go virtual or everyone's going to go back to an office? Where do you think that nets out from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think this case study is it's not a controlled environment, right? Or maybe it is a controlled environment in the sense that we have no choice. For many of us, we have no choice. We are here, and I would say, and it's ironic, for 10,000 people that normally find their way to the middle of Manhattan and the EY office, all of them are virtual. And so I think the virtual fatigue is in part a result of that. It's not our choice, right? We're in an environment where we want to control. We love our apps that work, and we love our technology that works. And when we get an email, we expect it to come across the wires instantly so we can open it. And we are now in an environment where we have to stay home. And I think we're going to find that, that when we have the option, it's clearly going to be, you're going to absolutely value the office experience 100%. But you're also going to, at the same time, going to recognize that, the priorities of your personal life that you can maybe manage around, and the things that you want to do, this virtual alternative is a very attractive option, to be able to fulfill your obligations from a work perspective, but also the other parts of your life that you want to make certain you get to your kids' game or whatever it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about just what that means in terms of cities, right, going forward. Like there's these cities like New York, obviously, and San Francisco that have been these magnets. They've had this just impossible to resist draw for certain kinds of knowledge workers. And if you see a scattering, right, of the knowledge workforce, right, to cities like I'm here in Park City, and Salt Lake City, I know is booming, and it's booming in part because there's this e-migration out of cities like San Francisco. Do you think that we end up in a world where there's a lot more offices for the big Fortune 500 companies in all the major cities as opposed to fewer like headquarter like offices?
I guess it kind of, I mean, maybe I'll speak as we occupy 22, 23 million square feet. So when we're, obviously all around the globe. And so, I think our view of the office is, it is, it's a place. It's a place for innovation. It's a place for meetings. It's a place for collaboration. It's a place for special projects and just-in-time projects. And I think if you look at that work, that activity, you can probably ascribe a pretty high value to that activity and say that activity is certainly logical for a central Manhattan headquarters and a central Manhattan rent. But then when you kind of move into other tasks and you say training, not that it's not important, but does it have to be done in central Manhattan? Heads down work. Does it have to be done in Manhattan? And so I think, and obviously I'm using Manhattan as an example, but I think as we get a little bit more sophisticated about how we use space and understand the value of space and the cost of space, it's not just an item. When I talk to clients, I try to oftentimes walk around the hall and I say, let's go for a walk. And I create the image of an electric meter and the little thing that spins around on the inside of it. And I said, look at that empty desk and look at that empty desk. And it's real money. And I think, it's been viewed as maybe kind of it's 3, 4, 5% of the bottom line. And I have to have it and there's nothing I can do about it. And I think we're really getting into an environment now where we're starting to understand what it costs. We're starting to understand how to use it, effectively, and we have the tools and technology to really optimize how we use that space. So I think we're at a real good point to, extract the right value, the right use of the space, as we go forward.
And what are the other unique features of this crisis and this capital markets crisis and this kind of real estate crisis, right, that we're in right now? And maybe crisis is almost too draconian a term, but this disruption of the real estate industry is the collision between how the public sector has responded and this collision between government stimulus and the packages the government has offered and the real estate industry. And we've seen a lot of that, obviously retail being probably the most extreme, the most obvious. What to you has stood out about the ways in which the government has responded to this crisis with an eye towards how it impacted the real estate sector in particular?
Yeah, look, it's I don't know how many people had pandemic on their worry checklist, and so this one was hard to prepare for, and economies are made up of millions and millions of transactions, and stopping it is it's just one of those scenarios that's hard to see. So look, I think governments have responded, all things considered, pretty aggressively and very do anything type approach. Central banks do anything approach. I think I was worried very early on at some of the belief that investors believed that certain debt products may not be backed up, may not be originated, or there would be liquidity in it. And like anything I said even before, I mean, there would be a cascading effect. And I think the central bank was incredibly aggressive at letting the entire marketplace know, we are here. and we have a very big a checkbook. So I think that, that confidence that there would be buyers for products, debt products, what have you, would be, that was incredibly important. I also think, I think around the world, policy was different, whether it was, not allowing for foreclosure or allowing for deferrals, or, whether it was mandated or not. I think some of those policies also were kind of good standstill so that there wasn't a train wreck. But we're going to have to eventually kind of relaunch this. I know there's a bunch of policy measures that are going to take us through September. It seems to me that there's going to be another action that's going to be required even past September. So all things considered, I think it's been managed relatively well, and our industry has done relatively well in a very difficult environment.
And one of the things, obviously, I think a lot about is, about 5 years ago, it felt like there was this age of enlightenment in the real estate industry, where this industry that had been a massive industry, 13% of the U.S. economy, but clearly one of the most just painfully obvious tech laggards, just a late adopter of technology. I mean, the way I think about it is the real estate industry basically sat out about 2 decades worth of innovation. And then around 2015, they recognized, it's actually critical that we take a forward posture on tech. And in some ways, you can see Fifth Wall and my firm as a manifestation of that, right? Of this need, this imperative to adopt technology. How do you think, and in what ways do you think this crisis changes or accelerates that need to adopt technology for real estate owners?
I guess, given I've been in the industry a while, maybe I'll defend the industry for a moment. And because you're kind of looping me in that bucket. I want you to know. Look, I think we had a business model that said, hello, I need space for my company. Okay, I've got this white box that you can buy for rent for 25 years, and we'll touch back base with you in 25 years. Now, if the iPhone or a consumer product was such that here's a product, we expect it to have a lifespan of 25 years, and then we'll revisit it after 25 years, you don't get the consumer feedback, the change, that structure. And in part, it's a reason is that when you build $1 billion building or a $5 billion building, you've got to have a debt structure. You've got to have capital markets that'll finance that giant building. And so it has to be long-term in nature. So what has this pandemic done? Like for us, our view is flexibility. Our view is we're looking for shorter term leases. We're looking for, hub and spoke. We want some alternative choices on a 3-year deal. And I think what that's going to do is it's now making we're now a bit more of a consumer, and we're going to be evaluating: is it a healthy building? Does it have the latest tech? Our lease is up in 3 years, and now we can go somewhere else because this other property has better characteristics and better attributes for us. And I think that landscape will drive development. I think that's one change. Obviously, the other change, which is kind of obvious, is all of the responses to COVID, touchless access. Heaven forbid, not having to sign in at the front desk, and wait and have someone call, and a lot of those tasks that I think we're going to graciously sunset into the distance. I think that is igniting the sector tremendously, and it's providing a operating system, a footprint that we can build on. And so I think that those are real responses to the pandemic that I think have sent us in a different trajectory.
I think that's right. And it almost feels like, in so many other categories of tech, you see that consumer tech introduces this kind of on-demand nature to technology and a kind of consumer centricity. And it's almost like the real estate industry has been compelled to adopt that. And across dimensions that probably they didn't almost self-conceptualize as having to provide. Things like clean air. And I think about, when we signed our office lease, I signed that and I don't think I asked the question, hey, how is the air quality regulated? That was not a top of mind question. And I would not have intuitively thought of my landlord as having a kind of embedded responsibility in providing me with clean air. It was just kind of a given. Now I don't think it's a given. And what's interesting is kind of that collision between, as you described, the demand for flexibility with all these new criteria that are put on landlords. And how do you think that'll play out from a public health perspective? Meaning, do you think landlords are going to have to take a very proactive approach around positioning their assets as having real policies and procedures and controls to protect the health and the well-being of all the tenants, all the employees working in their buildings?
Yeah, I think this, this pandemic will have a lasting effect. And I think, look, I think innovation kind of started with, this energy and looking at building management systems. I think that was kind of one of the, the obvious ones that I think technology really, got after. Obviously it's an immediate return. It's value. And now I think we're kind of morphing into, ESG, because now we can measure something and we recognize the costs of that. And so that couples very nicely with ESG. And now I think we're looking at health and air quality. And so, I think all of the kind of ways that we inhabit and occupy space, we've kind of got, three legs of the stool that I think we're not going back on. I think we're getting to the point where that's like, it's the checklist. But I think that checklist is going to grow. And I think it's an exciting time in the industry, because that's going to be your competitive positioning. Well, we have a lighting, we have ability to customize the lighting, for exactly whoever the user is. We got personal preferences as you go into that, office space. That customization, I think, is kind of what the direction that we're moving in.
And one of those legs of that stool that you mentioned is sustainability. And well before COVID, we saw a lot of pressure on landlords, right, to move towards a standard of carbon neutrality. You saw that from regulators in cities like New York and Los Angeles. You saw that from large capital allocators on the debt side, on the equity side. You even saw it from tenants. And so in some ways, the real estate industry was kind of triangulated between all these forces that are pushing it towards carbon neutrality. And I'm curious from your perspective, right, where you're working with, large real estate corporates around their finances, how are they planning for that? And how are they thinking about, what is our role in moving towards a carbon neutral future?
I guess I'll respond as an objective response. We surveyed over 200 companies, and this was literally in the last couple weeks. And we went through and we said, what's your priority? What's your technology priority? And the questions were very wide. But the first thing that they responded was, what's most important is I got to run my business more efficiently and productive. And so it was any tools and technology that can make my business run more efficiently. That's a priority. The second priority, the second most important item, was that they wanted technology to leverage new products, new solutions that they could expand their business. And the third was technology that could drive an ESG initiative within their organization. And so on the one hand, maybe disappointed that it's third. On the other hand, glad that it's in the top three with respect to from a policy perspective. And I think we as an industry are it's evolving. I think we're awakening, to that priority and what's possible. And I think in part, again, we're getting to the point where we can start measuring things. And as soon as you can start measuring things, you can manage them. And I think that's a real important advancement. And I think our, real estate, developers and owners and end users, all are focused on it. And I do think it's a rising priority within the industry.
I totally agree with your point around measurement, right? Like once you can measure something, you can actually track forward progress. But what's interesting is there's this other side of the coin to measurement, which is as soon as you can measure something, the government can tax it. And to some extent, that's kind of what we've seen, right, in New York and Los Angeles, which is that carbon is being measured, buildings are being audited, and there's a set of standards that are put in place that basically require building owners to get to carbon neutrality. And to the extent they're non-compliant, effectively it takes the form of taxes. How have real estate owners been planning for that and thinking through that? Because it feels like that's a secular trend that's going to play out over the next probably 2 decades, right? That more and more cities are probably going to move in this direction. And if you're the owner of an asset, you really have to have a long-term time horizon. Real estate is a long-term business. How are they thinking about that and planning for that?
Yeah. Look, I think we started with disclosures and ways of which companies need to communicate what their ESG disclosures were. And I think now we're kind of migrating toward we're going to tax, we're going to punish, we're going to fine, we're going to, and so, look, we do need to do something. So, and I think owners, in particular, there's 2 points, right? We work with all the big developers and a lot of our headquarter buildings. And we say, look, this is a priority. And when you're building a new building, what do you want to do? It's one thing when you're, starting from scratch and building something, if you have a 200-year-old historic building and so on and so forth. So there's orders of magnitude of how to address this. And I think, I think it's being addressed. I think it's a priority for our industry. And I think after Davos and everything, I think there was an incredible intensity and focus. It was before then, but I feel like it really ramped up. And then I did feel like this pandemic, has definitely been an interruption in that progress. But I have no doubt that real focus and intensity will pick right back up. Will absolutely pick right back up.
I think that's right. And I used to say, as we were starting to think about sustainability, that sustainability needs to be on every real estate CEO's top 3 priorities, right? And it probably should be number 1. And I said that in 2019. And I think I was probably wrong about 2020 because I think COVID is every CEO, and the response to COVID is every CEO's top priority. But my sense is that in some ways, the public health crisis, while it has an immediacy and it has an expediency that was kind of urgent in how real estate owners had to respond, the climate crisis is much slower moving, right? It's moving at a more sustained pace. But I think if we look out 10 years, the imperative to decarbonize, the imperative to become carbon neutral is going to be thrust on the real estate industry. And it's going to be exciting to see how they respond to that, because it represents, I think, just financially a really unique opportunity for owners to differentiate themselves, because the benefit of being carbon neutral is also that it's lower cost, but also an opportunity for collaboration between public sector and private sector. And that's probably one of the corollaries to the current crisis we're in, which is it almost feels like the public sector and the private sector, with respect to COVID and its response, has collaborated more than they ever have. And so that's just exciting to see. I'm curious, I always like asking this question to everyone that's kind of in a leadership position in the real estate industry, which is like, if you were to look 10 years out at the office industry, right, is kind of an example. What would be the most salient features of difference versus today? Like what would really be different in terms of how buildings would be operated versus how they are today? How do you think about that?
I think of two islands. I think the first island is the building, and the building operator historically that looked at their jurisdiction, and that it ended, once you entered the glass door of the tenant space. And you look at the other island, which is the inside the tenant space, and the things that are personal about productivity, collaboration, use of space, how we work. And I think those two, those two shall never meet. But I think in the future they will, because we're coming on standardized platforms. We've got, well, they know my Outlook knows if I worked out today. It knows, how many meetings I've been to, if I was into the office. And not to say that, all of, certain private information is, but I do think there is a analysis to be able to really understand what makes for productive teams, what makes for successful teams. I know that there's been a lot of different studies on that, but I think if you start to combine what the information about the building, about the digital twin, and all the information that we're able to track on a building side, and the activities of the occupants, and really try to extract big data information about that activity and how to make organizations more successful, collaborative, what's working. I think it's an intangible, but I think it's very achievable. And I think we will navigate, we all get uncomfortable about, personal information, but I think we're finding that there is information that can be shared, that can be very beneficial to the success of people's careers, success of businesses. And so I think that is, one area that I think, will be very important, and something that I think we'll achieve.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, this has been so interesting to get your insights. You're in such a unique position to share them. And I'm sure that you're incredibly busy with your clients, supporting them when they probably need it most. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark.